And we are back to talk about two of the biggest fantasy franchises in the game who just ended their second seasons in the last month or so, and that is Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, and House of the Dragon. And of course, if we're going to go into a deep dive on anything Lord of the Rings related, we had to invite our good friend and Lord of the Rings YouTuber, Mr. Yoystan, from the channel Men of the West. Brother, it's good to see you again. How have you been?
Hi guys, good to be back with you, Preston, Carmine.
We have our experts now, and now we are ready to talk about every Tolkien fan's favorite show, Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power.
You know what's funny, Preston? I think you and I were a bit more easy on the show this time around than Yoystan was, because last year I know all of us thought it was like super I know, actually, no, you and I were like, it's super mediocre. Yoystan hated the hell out of it.
Yeah.
And this season, we were like, the last two episodes were the best. But you, Yoystan, you did not like the last two.
Correct. Well, it's funny because I would agree with you guys that actually the season was better overall, but it had worse moments, if that makes sense. Overall, I think the quality was better, but just the moments that hit really hard. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd almost say that like the first season didn't take that many risks, which is why it was mediocre. And this season took more risks, but which, you know, hit higher sometimes, but then was worse on other times. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we'll jump into it, but my biggest problem, right, and it carries over from season one, but it was really bad in season two, was how they use the names of the characters. They call them Galadriel, Elrond, Gil-galad, but then they just are not those characters, like not remotely. You know, maybe they'll follow some of the same basic story beats that they have from the Unfinished Tales and from the Silmarillion and so forth, but they're not acting at all like their characters actually would.
Now, Yoystan, I think you had told me before that the one big misinterpretation that people have about the elves is that they're effeminate, when in fact the elves are androgynous, which means that like the female elves look more masculine, the male elves look more feminine. And so Galadriel should be a somewhat gender-bending, tall, large kind of character for being a woman, right?
Right. She's it's like 6'9", I think, in the book.
Jesus.
Is what people have thought. It's something crazy like that. Like, I know Aragorn is around like 6'6", and she's still taller than him. So she's absolutely massive. And I believe the correct line is of Amazon disposition, when she pretty much puts her hair up and does athletic feats, right? She's described in this sort of way. So yeah, no, absolutely.
But to be fair, like in reinterpreting, say, the Peter Jackson trilogy, like Liv Tyler should not be this like cute little feminine elf. She should be like this big woman, right?
I mean, yeah, so she's Galadriel's granddaughter. She's like 3/4 elven and like a quarter human, something like that. My math's probably off. But,
so maybe slightly more feminine than the other elves, but
yeah, it's tough. Maybe I was off on Galadriel. She was very tall, but I can't remember exactly how tall here. Tolkien Gateway has her at 6'4", but I swear I've seen taller than that. Arwen took the likeness of Luthien. And this is where we get into like Tolkien's definition of beauty, I guess, right? A lot of this stuff was based off of how he saw his wife, Edith. And very much he kind
who was 6'4".
Not quite, but Luthien, like on her gravestone is Luthien and on his gravestone is Beren. And Arwen takes after Luthien, right? And so there is, however he saw beauty, I suppose, is how I'd probably attribute that into the to the elven likeness. But honestly, aesthetically, the show, in my mind, that's never gotten that wrong. Galadriel looks in the show like how I think she probably would. She's in armor a lot. Again, I don't know how much fighting she did like that. Also, she was much more, if we're going to class it almost like D&D, she's less of a fighter, more of like a sorcerer type, you know? But yeah, I mean, as far as that goes, aesthetically, the show does pretty well, in my opinion. I always gave it props for that. And this season too, right? The CGI, the costumes, things like that are really good. I would say like 97% of the way there. You have a couple things that seem off, like Gil-galad. He he just strikes me as like some middle manager who hates his job most of the time. And I just...
That's true.
Like, he shouldn't be that way. He should
actually,
be...
I wanted to bring up something that you and I and Preston, actually, we talked about back for season 1. If there was one thing about this show that they really should have done instead of Galadriel, it should have been Galadriel's daughter, Celebrian?
Mm-hmm. Celebrian, yeah.
And if there's one thing that really honed that idea in, was that fucking kiss between her and Elrond. Like, the whole situation. In fact, you're right, the show is, I would argue, slightly... teeny tiny bit better, but again, what was awful was super awful, and what was good was really good. One of the things that, and I was telling this to Preston a while ago, and I put this up as like a short little review on my Twitter. One of the things that I feel as though when the reviews for season 1 were coming out, they were in the middle of making season 2, and I feel like they learned the wrong lessons. For example, something you said in your reviews for season 1 was that Arondir, for people who don't remember, he's the black elf character. Arondir was the most Tolkien-esque character in the entire show, and they pushed him back. Like, they removed a lot of his story for this. He almost did nothing. Isildur almost did nothing. And Galadriel, like, the problem with her is that she was a Mary Sue. So they remove a lot of her agency, which I didn't have an issue with, but she gets, for the most part, really neutered this season, which, again, I don't have an issue with that.
They kind of go the other way a little too much to try to balance off the first season, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That's what I've thought as well. So part of it was having to do with casting decisions. I can't remember why. I can't remember her name right now, but the one that played across from Arondir in that same plotline, Theo's mom.
Bronwyn.
Preston's favorite character.
I've said this a bunch, that like, of season 1, I felt that Bronwyn's story and Bronwyn and Arondir had the most compelling story. It was the most dynamic story. They were the most relatable characters. They had the most emotion. They had the most change. I thought that was the best story of season 1. And so when she didn't return because she chose to leave the show because she wanted to focus more on political activism, it was too bad. That's sad, because it was the best part of season 1, in my opinion.
Yeah, and that's what, like, Lord of the Rings adaptations can do rather well, is putting in a character like Arondir that's not a loreful character, right? Like, not a character in the lore, but acts loreful, right? Arondir very much struck me as it's a deeper lore reference, like Mablung or Beleg from the Silmarillion. They journeyed alongside men. They worked on behalf of the king of the woodland elves, Thingol, and that sort of wood elven connection was really good. And these kinds of characters, in my mind, can get away with a lot more than saying, Galadriel got captured and kissed her future son-in-law, right, and all this kind of stuff. Like, that is explicitly against the lore. Versus someone like Arondir, I'm like, oh yeah, like, this Sylvan elf could have totally existed, and he could have absolutely helped Isildur and done this and that, and wives and all of that. That's absolutely something that fills in the gaps, versus, just taking the characters that we actually have, that we actually know, and then just bending them, right?
It should have been her daughter.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because it's sort of like, this is, Carmine had talked about this with Andor. Like, Andor is so good because it's not really Star Wars, it's Star Wars adjacent.
Right.
It doesn't feel the need to take these like major characters, because obviously, who cares about Andor? He's a minor character in the whole series overall. But you have freedom to create a new story. Well, if you take a tried and true character, yes, that's going to bring in viewers, because people are going to be like, oh, Boba Fett.
Right,
but
exactly.
you're limited in what you can do with them for some reason, you know? Like
Absolutely.
there's no, yeah. Like,
and I think that's what they did with Galadriel. I think that's why it couldn't be Celebrian. They're like, people know Galadriel, so that will get more eyes on the screen, more subscriptions. Even if we don't do the character as she's written, even if we do nothing close to it, and we just write off her husband that absolutely exists, Celeborn. We just get rid of him for a while and then do whatever we want with her. More people will sign up versus if they thought it was just some random elf. I actually take the opposite approach. Like, yeah, the name recognition's not there, but the idea of, oh, wait, Elrond is Galadriel's son-in-law? Most people don't walk away with that vibe after watching the movies. Like, getting that idea from the outset, and it's like, Galadriel's daughter married Elrond. Okay, I'm kind of interested to learn what this, because she's not in the Lord of the Rings. And you could go a lot of ways with that, right? Like, she left Middle-earth in the canon 500 years or so before the Lord of the Rings began. The main events of the Lord of the Rings. Is because she was wounded by orc archers. She was like poisoned, right? And there are darker implications with that, right? Some people have speculated what poisoned by an orcish arrow actually means. And you can take that character, right? It's very dark implications, right? I think it's actually just poisoned, but right, darker implications there. You can take that character and do other stuff with them that you just can't do with Galadriel.
Yeah, and I do wonder like if they have to make things very different, because there's lore that's outlined in the appendices, and then there's lore that's outlined in the Silmarillion.
Right.
And I do wonder if, because they don't own the Silmarillion, they purposely have to do something different than what's in the lore.
I go back and forth with all that, because one of my favorite Lord of the Rings adaptations is the Lord of the Rings Online. And in that game, they can't use the name Anatar, for instance. At least they haven't. But then I'm like, Rings of Power did. They used that name outright. And I was like, okay, so they have a couple things that other adaptations don't have access to. But I don't know how far that goes. I really don't. And I feel like they try not to tell us because they don't want to show they don't have a lot of the rights to the Silmarillion. But at the same time, they want to be able to throw in, hey, look at this Valar name we just dropped. But then I'm very careful. I'm like, okay, you dropped Manwë's name. I think Manwë is mentioned in The Lord of the Rings. Aule's name is definitely mentioned. But you didn't drop Ulmo, the god, the Vala of the sea, the god of the sea. You didn't drop his name, and he's not in The Lord of the Rings. He's in the Silmarillion. So I'm like, okay, interesting. You only have rights to so many things, not even name drops.
Right.
Yeah, right. It's still more than other adaptations that I've seen, but less than they should have to tell the Second Age story, in my opinion.
The one thing I keep going back and forth on is, should they have just made their own characters? Like, did we need Elrond? Maybe Elrond shows up as like a cameo, but from what Arondir being, again, possibly one of the best, Arondir, and Adar being two of the best characters in the show for me, especially at the very end with Adar. Jesus Christ. Such a good... I love the portrayal. Such a good character. It feels like they should have just done their own thing with their own original characters, so they have so much freedom, and then just have other characters like Galadriel and Elrond show up as like cameo roles, even Bombadil, and then just, have this story take place in like the Middle-earth thing, because... Man, I know you guys really hate a lot. I know the Tolkien guys really hate a lot of what's happening here. So what's the most egregious thing they've done for season 2?
I think the kiss was... I think that was what kind of broke it for me, where I'm like, okay, like, you don't care about these characters. You don't care at all.
Even as a distraction? Because that's what it was. It was supposed to be a distraction to slip her the thing.
Right. And so in universe, it kind of makes sense for that, but I'm talking about the writers. The writers could have written that scene to be even a little bit different, where her hands are bound in front of her rather than behind her. And then Elrond, like, kneels and kisses her hand, like Pippin would with Denethor, for instance. Kisses her hand in a very respectful way kind of thing, and then slips it into her hand like that. You could have easily switched this scene around to be not that dramatic, but they wanted the outrage, I think.
So what you're saying is they wanted to audition for the CW show, because that's what it kind of feels like sometimes.
Or I mean, if this is really in the wake of Game of Thrones, we know that Game of Thrones gets messy and icky, right? Mm-hmm. And this is, in all honesty, 1% as icky as Game of Thrones, but still, it's icky. It's the same with like Galadriel's sexual tension with Sauron first season, all sorts of things that they were clearly doing to give us a little bit of icky soap opera feel.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's one moment, and the tension and stuff like that, like, people looking back can kind of write it off, but in the moment, it's just like, do you guys even know that there are books? I went onto Twitter that I think I was still watching that episode, and I just started roasting the writers. Like, I put a picture of all the books on Twitter, and I was like, man, these guys should know that there's actual books. They'd be so impressed. They might even be able to use it as source material.
You're definitely not getting the early screeners now. By the way, real quick.
Oh yeah.
Because you and I were discussing this as the show was going on, and at that point, me and Preston already finished, and I was just talking to you about this, and you guys were towards the end. We had this conversation. I know things. I'm watching the show. I'm watching these episodes. I know things are happening. I'm watching them happen on screen. But why does it feel like nothing is happening? Why? Because Isildur, his whole shit. He's a very important character. His whole thing is just walking around. He fights a monster, kinda. He gets captured by like tree people, and then he just goes back and chills. Arondir gets like a cool Legolas moment towards the very end, but him, same thing, just walking around. A lot of characters just kind of just walking around, chilling, doing their own thing.
What's funny, you're right, Carmine, that when you actually think about what happened this season, it's not very much, but at the same time, I do remember there's a lot more salient memories of weird, shocking stuff this season. So in some ways, it feels like more happened, even though if you told me, like, please tell me the plot of season 2, I'd be like, but
right.
But like, for instance, like when the series begins, we have that assassination scene that's mirrored at the end. It's very gruesome, and there's the horror scene, and then there's the black muck blob like rolling down the mountain. Like, that's very memorable and very creative, and I'll grant that. And I remember the horse chase scene that I thought was so impressive. It was very brief, but I'm just like, wow, this is an incredible horse chase scene, and there's just a lot of like little things like that I did kind of remember, where I'm just like, that's really impressive. But you are right, Carmine, that I don't know if anything happened.
Right.
There was a battle.
Exactly. Like, that's the virtue of this spectacle kind of storytelling that I've been thinking a lot about this, like, honestly, for years. I heard about how George Lucas with the prequels, he was very spectacle oriented, right? He was very much like, he wants great moments. And I think that's where some of the larger plots can fall apart, because when you look at Lord of the Rings, you always think of an adventure. You always think of a journey, right? Carmine, you and I talked about this a while back, and it's like, I said, why didn't they go with other stories like the Angmar War or the Gondorian Civil War? And you were like, when I think Lord of the Rings, there's a bunch of different races of characters coming together and going somewhere. In this show, problem that they're falling into is that they're actually not physically traveling anywhere. When you watch The Lord of the Rings, when you like watch The Hobbit, you can see that they're getting closer to their destination. Like, you see the markers. You're like, okay, like there's Mordor way in the distance. We're getting closer. You feel like they're actually
the mountain's
making that journey.
Bigger this time, right? The mountain's bigger in this scene. They're getting closer.
Exactly. And so you feel like you're on that journey with them, and that stuff is happening. Versus a Game of Thrones type of storytelling that I think Rings of Power is trying to tap into.
Oh yeah, the ensemble.
But the thing is, the ensemble and kind of your major locations that you always go back to. Oh, there's a dialogue scene, and then we go to a different major location. There's a battle, different major location. The problem with that is, like, you need super interesting, like, politics. You need the people kind of conniving and scheming for that sort of storytelling to be interesting when there's not a journey involved. And, as much as I love Second Age, this is why I think they really need to cut some of the fat from this show, like the Stranger, the Gandalf plotline and stuff like that, to really focus in on, like, actually developing the characters in Rhaegar, the characters in Numenor, and then having us begin that journey of Elendil's getting ready to leave Numenor and go to Middle-earth. Like, he's getting ready for that journey. Or Sauron is beginning to take his armies up to Rhaegar, and you're seeing, like, these giant movements. You're seeing Middle-earth and how these characters are actually responding to these situations. Versus, I mean, you're not wrong. You're not the only person I've heard say that, too. I watched, like, one of Moist Critical's early reviews on season 2, and And he said, especially with the Harfoots, it feels like they're talking, but they're not saying anything. They're just doing nothing. Yeah.
Right. I see, like, what did they do? See, I'm really trying to like now that it's been about a month, right, since the show ended. I remember Gandalf meeting Tom Bombadil and getting swallowed by that tree. Being swallowed by the tree was a pretty cool scene.
Yeah.
And I remember Tom Bombadil didn't piss me off as much as I thought it would piss me off. That's about it. I was just like, I'm expecting this to really piss me off. And then I'm like, okay, that's fine. Whatever. Tom Bombadil.
He was actually, I think, like my co-host, my friend Royan, Tom Bombadil was what got to him the most because he's very much about descriptors, Tom Bombadil. He's jolly, bright blue jacket, right? And you know, he's got his boots and all this. Boots are yellow, and he's very descriptive. He's very much like a person you want to be around. He's the life of the party, vibrant in every single way. And
they
literally
definitely toned him down. They were definitely scared that people were going to have really violent reactions to Tom Bombadil, because fans do have very violent reactions to Tom Bombadil. But it's like, if you're scared that people are going to have very violent reactions to Tom Bombadil, don't put him in. Like, it's
exactly. He's not even close to where he is in the lore, and he's not even close to the person he is in the lore. And I mean, also, he's one of those like very happily married guys. I mean, the job that he does every single day as Tom Bombadil is like going and picking flowers for Goldberry, his wife. Like, that's like all he does. And he has no wife in this. Like, that's what I mean. They call him Tom Bombadil, but he's the furthest thing from it. They take his joy, they rip that out. They take his wife, they rip that out.
They were scared to put him in, so they didn't really put him in. They put in a very neutered, agreeable character because Tom Bombadil is loud. And instead they put in a muted guy.
Yeah.
But it's like, what's the point of putting Tom Bombadil in? You know,
right? What's the point is to give Gandalf a mentor, more of a master, if you will, to help him through the ropes. You know,
easily could have been Círdan, by the way, which is funny because in the lore, Gandalf gets to Middle Earth, and Círdan is one of the first people he meets. Círdan the shipwright, and Círdan then gives him the Ring of Fire, and he says, pretty much, you're going to need this more than I will. And so easily, instead of going east, you could have had the stranger go west and bring the hobbits with him, and they maybe even become, it's not loreful, right? But you can work with what Rings of Power has established to make it a little bit more loreful. Have them go west instead of east. They come to the Grey Havens. They meet our other characters. Gandalf is working with like Círdan, and then the Harfoots actually discover the Shire. Like, you could have easily.
That's what I felt like they were taking the plot, right? Eventually, like, they're implying that the Harfoots found the Shire. Why not have them go the right direction? But
right.
Well, since we're around the Harfoot Gandalf area, Preston, I don't know if you've told him yet. I don't think I told him yet. Remember your idea about Gandalf and the Dark
Yoystan,
Wizard?
I had this idea. Well, I heard it from somewhere else and I stole it, but nonetheless, I thought it was a great idea. But the idea was, don't you think the show would have been better if it turned out that the stranger was actually Saruman and that the Dark Wizard was actually Gandalf?
Okay, yes, to a point. Like, I like the idea of the stranger being Saruman, how someone could fall so low, almost. The Dark Wizard being Gandalf. Gandalf's personality before he becomes a wizard is one of self-doubt, fear, and love. Before he becomes a wizard, he actually tells the gods, don't send me. I'm afraid of Sauron. I'm not strong enough to beat him. And then the gods say, that's why you should go. And so his story is all about finding courage and giving it to others. And so the Dark Wizard wouldn't really work with that. But even if that were like a blue wizard, which they don't have access to, I don't think, but a blue wizard and the stranger is Saruman or something. I would think that'd be more interesting to some degree, right?
Because it was so obvious from the beginning. Everybody's like, well, that's Gandalf. That's like immediate, like in season 1, everybody's just like, well, that's Gandalf. And then when you meet the Dark Wizard, everyone's like, well, that's Saruman. And Carmine and I both have a memory of something that I don't like. We're not sure if it's a Mandela effect, but like we both seem to have a memory of them revealing that the Dark Wizard was Sauron. But then when the final show came out, because we watched the the early copies,
right?
And then when the show came out, it seemed like that reveal was gone. And so we're not, yeah.
And that's what I remember Carmine telling me that too, like months ago, was that reveal. And so I was prepped for it, and everything else that Carmine had told me about the season actually was correct. But then I was like, that one didn't come true. So I do wonder if either they went back and cut something, or maybe it is the Mandela. We just think it's Saruman so much that it didn't actually turn out to be him. Because yeah, I don't think they did reveal that. They pretty much set him up to be like, I've come here before. We're friends. I feel like he even called him my friend in the same way that Saruman in the movies does. It's like it's very, the way he spoke and everything was very reminiscent of that, but I don't think they said.
Well, the showrunners
Saruman
came out and said like, that can't be Saruman. It's impossible. So
I think it is, though. I think they're just lying. Because who is it? Radagast? Like, it's not Radagast.
Well, here's the thing, though. Whoever it is, they have like ties with the women, the weird Eminem-looking women from the first season.
Right.
Who, it felt like the moth women,
the Slim Shady
characters. Because at the very end of last season, I remember they were looking for someone specific, and it sounded like they were looking for Sauron. But
all right, here's a question. Here's a question though: is it canon that there's only 5 wizards? Could there be a 6th wizard?
I remember I had to look this up for the podcast. So, I believe when they refer to Astari, right, wizards, there are 5 in Middle-earth, at least. If there happened to be any more, they would be way far south or east. But it is not, I'm just going to say 95% canon that there are just 5 that were sent. And we wouldn't know if there were more, but I'm pretty sure there are only 5.
Well, one could make the argument, oh, this guy becomes whatever, the fucking yellow wizard, and then he gets killed, and he's not, and therefore he's gone, you know?
They might. I could see them doing that. I mean, they've broken lore in less crazy ways.
Right, than having an extra wizard.
Yeah, it's like that.
And everyone's like, what's a yellow wizard? I don't know.
Do you think that maybe it could be
a
combination of the 2 blue, and then like he gets split in half?
Oh, that would be crazy. Again, less crazy things I feel like already happened. But yeah, I mean, it could be. I had to look up Astari again on Tolkien Gateway, but it's, let's see, the name Wizards, which means wise in the sense of wise men, is a translation of Istari. And so it could be that like there were more wise men for sure, something akin to a wizard, but I think there were only 5 sent. They might do some weird crap where they just cut them in half and then.
Well, the reason I bring up the moth women is because last season at the very end they were looking for what it sounded like they were looking for Sauron, and they even say it's not him. And now we find out that the Dark Wizard guy, he sent the moth women. So, like,
or I have another thing that would see this another thing to prove that I should be on the writing staff. He's a Balrog.
I mean, again, at this point, not much would surprise me with this show. They did it, speaking of the Balrog, I mean, they did the Fall of Moria without doing the Fall of Moria. Oh, there's a Balrog. Oh, we just covered him with 3 inches of stone. We're good. We don't have to worry about him anymore.
Yeah.
They just...
But, you know, like, Balrogs are supposed to be the same thing as, like, as the wizards, right? So
right. Yeah, they're both Maiar. One's, rather corrupted, right?
So that's just him before. It's just him before he got corrupted. It's just a Balrog before he got corrupted.
You know, if I hadn't seen Durin's Bane already, you could talk me into believing that could be Durin's Bane. But to put a second Balrog in would be absolutely crazy. I feel like they should know that the audience wouldn't buy it. But yeah,
I mean, what did they say? The the origin story for the metal was a Balrog and somebody fighting and having the
lightning or whatever.
Lightning and a Cimmeril. Ah, fuck.
Poor Yoystan.
So come on.
Before we get off the Gandalf storyline, the last episode was great until the last 15 minutes, and it all starts with the Gandalf name reveal. So what's going on with that? Like, is there any like lore implication here? His name being Gandalf? Is it something Tolkien did, or it's not in the lore?
So his exact translation is Elf of the Wand, right? And it's from one of the Norse dwarven names from the Voluspa, right? And Tolkien kind of pulled that in. But the thing about Gandalf is he's very holy in a way. Again, magic and spirituality in Tolkien's works definitely go hand in hand. It's not just something anybody can pick up. Their spirit, I feel like, has to have some sort of higher connection, greater connection to the music of the Ainur and so forth. And so Gandalf has that. And so he's not really... Gandalf really isn't an identity that we're supposed to just always cling to. He's got like 6 or 7 names, something like that, from a bunch of different people. So many names, so many different titles because of the people he interacts with. And even when he comes back from the dead, right, he goes by Sauron for like they say he's Sauron as he should have been kind of thing, right? Like that's the idea. He's not really, Gandalf is this idea of an old man that he conjured to not make the people of Middle-earth afraid of him. That's why they're all old men. But they're really not that. In my mind, when Gandalf and Frodo passed back into the West, Gandalf was like, I don't need this guise anymore. I can just become myself again.
Is he like those sci-fi movies where they don't want to spend the money like designing an alien? So the alien's like, I can take whatever form you're comfortable with, and so I chose this form. And it's like, really, you chose a form of a person, really?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the movie where the girl Jodie
is.
Foster goes through the wormhole, and the alien's her dad. Is that Jodie Foster?
Yes.
Alien film Contact.
Yes.
It's where she goes
Yes.
and the alien takes the shape of her father to make her feel better.
He used to even walk around as an elf in the first age. At least he would go among the elves because he loved them so much. I think it was Years of the Trees, but yeah, in the Elder Days, right?
So he used to have a fetish for really tall women, and then he like switched it up and wanted to hang out with the hobbits.
With the hobbits, that's right.
I think probably an elf like broke his heart, or like a really tall elf broke his heart, and then he's like, "Fuck it, I'm hanging out with short people after this."
Yeah, he got too tired of these tall people and their wars, and yeah, I just wanted to go smoke a little bit with the hobbits, man. That's nothing wrong with that.
The annoying part is that he misinterpreted what they said, or he just like twisted it around, because they were calling him Grand Elf, and then he goes back to and I know what my name will be, Gandalf, like that. But that's not what they said, though. Like it's just
which is funny too, because that implies that he knows what an elf is. He didn't know like how to speak when we first fell, but how does he know what an elf is? What?
No. Maybe just, you're right. He just See, the thing is, once you remove the winking at the camera aspect of it, like what's left? The only thing that's left is that he literally misunderstood what they said. And he's like, my name is Gandalf, because they said, I think they said Gandalf, even though they said Great Elf, because they don't know what an elf is.
Yep. Yeah. That's the assumption we have to make. Yep.
So Isildur and Arondir, that whole plot line in the south, that went literally nowhere. The stuff in the east with the hobbits and Gandalf, that was just kind of a nothing burger. I think the real highlight for me of the season,
we had that hobbit like sexual tension between
between I don't even remember their names. Like
between I don't remember her name and I don't remember his name.
I think his name is like
exactly
Marmac. Fucking Rings of Power. Let me look at the Rings. I'm actually curious. It's like Marmac, Merrimack, something like that. Some crap like fucking so dumb.
And we travel with the actual hobbit, but I've already forgotten her name until next season comes around. But yeah, I mean, okay. I have wondered about this for a while, and you guys can really help me out here, right? So season 5 of Game of Thrones.
Her name's Poppy.
Poppy, that's right. In season 5 of Game of Thrones, they didn't really need Bran, so they just like shelved him, right, until season 6. Should we, like, Isildur, should we just, would it be better to do that with characters we don't need until we need them again? Or is it better to have like a nothing burger Isildur plotline until we need him again? I don't know which is worse, or which is better, rather.
I mean, I don't think it's that difficult to figure out like that they should do something. You know, right. Like I don't think you have to shelve anybody. You just got to think of something for them to do.
Yeah.
Like, it's not that tough.
Yeah.
Like, have them find a MacGuffin. Have them be like, oh, we need to find this like special wand. It doesn't fucking matter. Like, what are you gonna do with that wand? I don't know. Like, you just gotta find. Like, you could literally have them do anything, but have them do something.
I mean, like. Okay, just if thinking about it that way for 30 seconds, Theo, Arondir, and Isildur, they go back to investigate Mordor, see if there's anything left of that town that they had come from in the first season. And doing so, they find that Sauron has indeed returned to Mordor at a time. He's not here right now, but he set up some sort of forge in Mount Doom. And they're like, we gotta warn the elves. Easy. Because he's going to use that forge to create the One Ring eventually. Like,
right. And they
easy.
Right, and they don't, and they're all clueless. The elves are all clueless and are hanging with Sauron all day.
Yeah, and, they're like, yeah, exactly. But that would even be more interesting. They journey to Mordor, find that he has a forge set up in that volcano, and they are like, what is he doing? We don't know what this is for. And then we as the audience are like, oh crap, like he's almost ready to forge the One Ring, and that's a setup for next season.
There it is. It's fine. Yeah.
You're right. Like, it's maybe not perfect, but it's something for them to do. That's not just standing around.
It's something for them to do rather than for like. Wait, why did they meet the Ents again? What did the Ents do?
Kidnapped Theo.
They kidnapped Theo, and they were going around beating up the wild men. They kept chopping down the trees, and then they captured them. And then Arondir was able to negotiate the whole thing as a misunderstanding, so they let him go, and that's it. Like, look, we'll get to...
So it was an episode of Three's Company.
Basically. We'll get to House of the Dragon in a minute, but, like, the one thing I hate is that House of the Dragon Season 2, some asshole on Twitter was like, this could have been an email, and all of a sudden that goes viral, it becomes the popular opinion about Season 2, when in reality, Rings of Power Season 2, that was the email. For, like, the most part, like, a lot of the, like, that itself could have been an email.
I mean, I think, I want to say that the story, okay, I am going to say that in my opinion, so a lot of people thought that Sauron's manipulation of Celebrimbor was the best part of the season. In my opinion, the best part of the season was the arc of Adar.
Yeah.
Like, and I think that needed to stew the entire season for it to have the impact that it had. To really believe that this guy loved the orcs and to have their betrayal of him. Like if you were betrayed in 2 episodes, you'd be like, who cares? But he goes and he needed 10 episodes, maybe even more. Maybe it would have been better if it went longer, but he needed time with them, and he needed time before he was betrayed.
I would agree with the premise of that. I think, so Ryan and I, we talked about this one a lot, because my other thematic pet peeve of the whole season, it was the orc family and the orc morality that was kind of that they were trying to set up. So I think Adar as a concept is cool. And actually, if he would have been a dark elf, like a straight up Morroquendi, who had these run-ins, like similar sort of backstory, but instead of representing orcs, he's representing either men of the East or dark elves. Especially because we don't see the dark elves much at all in Middle-earth, in Lord of the Rings and stuff, right? But there are a bunch of dark elves that didn't go to Valinor that are just running around in the East. And so, like, you could have had them come in with that similar sort of plotline with that axe to grind against Sauron and him returning to Mordor, and what Morgoth maybe had done to them in the Elder Days. Why I think that would be better than the orcs is all of the implications that we get from orcs having families and just looking for a place to go. All this kind of stuff opens jars that they could never put the lid back on, right? When the orcs betray Adar and they just start murdering him, I'm like, I thought Sauron at least would use the power of the rings to do it. He just does it off screen. I don't even know how he manipulated all of them.
It's weird. Yeah. It's weird because in the end, I mean, I think that, you know, Uncle Benjen did a great job with Adar, and I think the guy that replaced Uncle Benjen did a great job with Adar. And you feel for him because he's really good. He's in my opinion, he's the best actor of the season. He does a really great job. I buy it. But in the end, he comes off as essentially a naive, bleeding heart liberal who thought he could save these honestly hopeless people. Like, it's a very racist message in the end. Like, no, actually, these people are hopeless. And
that's my biggest problem with it, is because the implications are that all of our heroes are actually genocidal. Like Aragorn, dude, if you watch Lord of the Rings after watching that episode of season 2 with the orc baby, I'm like, how many orc fathers did he cut the heads off of? A lot. Yeah. And then even beyond that, we know that the men of the Fourth Age ended the orcish race. Like, if you can call it a race. Right.
And I understand that, like, Tolkien was asked about this, like, in his later years, and he himself, like, had to kind of, like, write around it because he just wasn't thinking about it probably when he wrote Lord of the Rings. Like, he wasn't asking these moral questions about, he just needed villains. So he's like, here's some orcs. Yeah. But the show is now bringing up this moral question and making this moral question central to the plot, having the most engaging storyline of the show be this plot, and then to have this, like, very disappointing result of it, which is no, like, we're going to bring up this very interesting moral question, like, are there redeemable orcs? And then be like, no, no, there's not.
Especially they could have. You're exactly right. They could have hinged this plot point to actually be something, even though I didn't love the beginning of it, they could have at least used it to make Sauron look even more evil when he forges the One Ring. If he used the One Ring to, like, mastermind all of the orcs and pretty much enslave an entire race of people to where they aren't redeemable now that Sauron's around, like, and
it would be more tragic. That. You're right. It would be more tragic.
Yeah. And because, we would see, like, Sauron as so evil. Yeah.
Right. Rather than, like, the orcs just being fundamentally hopeless
for no reason, that off-screen reason. Yeah, they just out of nowhere they just start stabbing Adar for that shot. Again, it's all about the spectacle, the shock value. It's not about the actual setup. We can assume Sauron's super vague powers throughout the season just allowed him to manipulate all these orcs, but then I'm like, why didn't he do that in episode 1 of season 2 during the first 5 minutes when he got murdered? Like, why didn't he just take everybody and force them under his command?
I'll grant the show that, like, that definitely pulled my emotional heartstrings, and, like, it made the character of Adar and his arc fascinating and tragic. It was I mean, I have to say, like, the scene where he, like, put on the ring and all of a sudden he appeared to be a regular elf again, and then he took off the ring and he looked like. That was well done. It was really, really well done.
It was.
It's a really beautiful emotional scene. But yeah, they could have made it more tragic for the orcs as well. But and you know, I don't know.
It's lost opportunity. Absolutely,
a little lost opportunity. But I mean, and it's funny because it's just like the plot line that really made me feel something. Because I don't know if anything else really made me feel anything, but that plot line. I mean, I guess Celebrimbor, I definitely am like, fuck, what a tragic character. I do think, like, totally. Fuck.
I felt something for a split moment. There was one episode that really stood out to me in this whole season. I think it was episode 5. I remember Royan and I were both just like, wow, was that really good? Like, I was pretty engaged in every single scene. I think it was a Numenor, Celebrimbor, and Moria episode. It was just those 3 plot lines, and every single one hit beats, right? It was like the faithful being persecuted by the king's men. You had that one guy Valandil get killed after sparing Ar-Pharazôn's son, right? I don't remember his son's name, but that moment really got me too. There were a couple glimmers And that whole episode, I gave it like a 9 out of 10. Versus everything else, I think the highest was like a 6 out of 10.
Carmine and I were talking about this aspect of the series, how it starts out kind of neutral, and then it gets good. Mm-hmm. And Carmine and I are talking. They're like, are they? Is this show actually becoming good? Is this happening? And then we're like, what if it? Let's see if it sticks the landing. Let's see if it sticks the landing. And it doesn't really stick the landing. The landing, like, there's just some really cheesy fucking lines at the end.
Yeah.
But there's a like mid to late season, like the 50 to 75% or the point, or the 50 to like 90% moment of the season is not bad, you know? And then
and then it just dives. And it's weird things. It's weird choices too. I'm convinced that the final episode had a lot of edits or something weird happened, because I swear Arondir got killed in episode 7. He was done. I was like, dang. All right. They just like took, and I forgot that Carmine had talked to me about this too. I was like, wow, they really killed like the best character in the show. Goodbye, Arondir. Like, man, he did a good job. And then the next episode, we just cut to him just walking normally. He's like not even wounded.
Oh yeah, I completely thought he died too. I was like, oh fuck, my favorite character.
He got like a broadsword through his like liver. Like he was done. That's what it looked like, at least in episode 7. He was absolutely killed, and then he's just fine, just walking around the next episode. I had to like pause it, go, what?
Maybe they secretly got Bronwyn back for season 3, and they're like, "Fuck, we need this character."
He was like, "I can't die."
I wanted to ask you about Sauron, who, by the way, for me, best character in the entire show. So, like season 2, they finally like made him fun. He's such a toxic ex-boyfriend, you know. Like he's punching you, like, look what you're making me do to you. I don't want to do this. Like that's some toxic ex-boyfriend shit. Yeah. When he initially dies in the first episode, becomes goop. Is that like lore? Is that canon?
No, not that exactly. So Sauron's deaths are a really interesting point. Maybe I gotta just do a full video of like every time he's died in the lore. Because I think he's died 3 times. I think he dies 3 times in the lore. The first time he dies is during the downfall of Numenor, actually. And he pretty much, the waves come over, he drowns. That's it. His spirit, because the One Ring exists, his spirit stays in Middle-earth and like is strong enough to actually carry the One Ring back to Mordor. He flies, I guess. His spirit just like flies across the ocean. I've always been confused on how to interpret that. Either that's what happens, or he leaves the One Ring when he goes to Numenor.
Wait, hold on. Rewind a sec. You're saying a guy who like lives inside a volcano and breathes and can deal with like the toxic fumes there, like actually needed oxygen to live and like drowned?
Yeah, and he got destroyed. During the reshaping of the world, that was it. But he lost something. He lost his ability to shapeshift, which I kind of like that. Like, he lost some of his innate powers. He had to take on the armor. He couldn't take on a fair guise again. So that whole secrecy deception thing, no longer a strategy for him. So that's when we get the armored version that we see in the prologue of The Lord of the Rings, post downfall of Numenor, and then we get his second death at the hands of Elendil and Gil-galad, right? Isildur cuts the One Ring, boom, he's done. And then obviously we get his return during The Lord of the Rings, and then his final end with the destruction of.
And even then, he's not really dead. So like, his spirit lingers, but like as like a whisper, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. It's too weak to ever take shape again. It's a contentious point in the lore that either he goes to where Melkor's spirit was in the void, like beyond the world, pretty much like space, or he's around but too weak to.
Isn't he technically?
But this is where like Tolkien was like toying with the idea of a sequel, and that he never did, right?
Exactly. Yep. Exactly. I don't know what. I think he was going to be done with Sauron, and bring in either one of the wizards from the east or, I'm not sure, some sort of cult was his idea. It was going to be a cult about something.
Well, technically Sauron is going to come back even in the lore, because isn't there supposed to be like final battle with Morgoth where he somehow breaks through and launches another final assault?
So Tolkien, I've got to do more research on this too. He became a little bit more scientific materialist a little bit in his writing instead of purely like metaphysical with things, because towards the later parts of his writing, he actually goes back and nulls out the Dagor Daggerath, the pretty much Ragnarok battle, and he says that Morgoth could never die because he permanently scarred the world. During the early days of the world, he permanently scarred it, and so his shadow would always be there. He couldn't technically die. And so during that final battle, though, if it was going to be canon, right, pretty much Morgoth and all of his forces would come out of they'd go over the walls of night, break through the door of morning, I believe, and kill the sun. I think they would take the sun out of the sky and descend upon the world, and then the Valar would send like their champions and stuff, and it was going to be this sweet battle. Turin Turambar, who's like the cursed character in Tolkien's works, was going to be the one to kill him. So a man was going to kill the devil, pretty much.
Because as it kind of sits, you know, really like Tolkien has diminishing villains, right? Like the first villain is the devil, and then the second villain is the devil's assistant. And then the third villain is a cult, like, you know, like it's
right. I would even say like Sauron, right? The devil's assistant's assistant, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And I do really like that because it kind of it follows the pattern that he has overall. Like power generally diminishes in Middle Earth as time goes on, because you have just these buff, strong, intelligent, crazy elves of the first stage like Feanor and Finkelfin and just these absolute chads. And then by the end, it's like, it's Wormtongue who kills Saruman, right? He just slits his throat, and he's just like a beggar pretty much on the road. He's just absolutely so it's just that huge descent, which I find a lot of fascination with.
That is kind of funny that these like godlike, that Wormtongue takes out this like godlike character, I mean demi-godlike character, by slitting his throat.
And then a hobbit just like shoots him in the back with an arrow. And that's it. Yeah, shoots Wormtongue in the back. Yep. I would say though I'd agree with Carmine. My favorite plot line, I always described this season kind of like a flower almost. Like the middle of it was the Rings of Power and the actual forging of the rings. You got Celebrimbor, you have Anatar, that deception going on. There were some really cool like gaslighting moments and weird things going on.
They did horror really well this season. They did. Like as much as we laugh at that blob was really creative and like scary. Or like when Gandalf got swallowed up by the tree, like it looked really good. That was like a scary moment, you know?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And the psychological aspects of it were really quite good. I think my only problem with that plot line was what were Sauron's powers? Right, I don't need like a spell book. I don't need it listed out for me, but he could do anything that the plot needed him to do, and it just felt weird to me.
Yeah.
I wish it would have been purely deceptive magic. If it was purely like illusionary, purely lying and all this kind of stuff, that would have been great. But then at the end, he's like using like the Force to pick up guys and like make them kill each other. I'm like, what is happening?
Yeah, that's actually very... That's what I loved about Sauron in the final episode when he's fighting Galadriel, that boss battle. He's shape-shifting. I love that. That was so cool. And he's like, I would assume he is stronger and more skillful than her. But man, like that last episode is all I remember from season 2. And I remember it because most of it is great. And then the last 15 minutes really fucking suck. When like, and I hate, this is what it really feels like to me, season 2. It feels like there are writers in the writer's room who have really good ideas, and sometimes they get superseded by, like, the showrunner's cousin who he's doing a favor for, who has no writing credentials and is just putting in stuff he thinks is cool, right? Because when she goes, you want to heal Middle-earth? Heal yourself. It's so cringe. Like,
worst line of the whole season.
Like, it's a shame. They're bringing in for season 3. They're bringing in the writers from The Crown, so we'll see what happens there. I also kind of feel bad for these guys making the show because it seems like the Tolkien estate is giving them crumbs, and then in a couple of years when they run out of money, they'll give them more crumbs because I'm sure they can't do certain things, and at the same time, like, how do you even cover the story? Because I know in the actual lore, it took them hundreds of years to perfect the Rings of Power, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely.
So how do you really do that? Like, and then you feel bad, but at the same time, like we've seen shows that have had like almost no references to the main story do better. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. It's the problem with prequels, right? And it's the problem with like, hey, this is a brand name. And I always say it on my channel. People are like, why would you watch something that you clearly don't like? And it's like, well, I'm a Lord of the Rings YouTuber and it calls itself The Lord of the Rings. I'm going to watch it. I'm going to review it because if I didn't, it would get like, if all the people that didn't watch it or didn't like it, didn't watch it, it would have 100% everywhere.
That's true. That's true.
So it deserves the criticism, right? So it deserves that. It calls itself Lord of the Rings, but the moment it stops, I'm done watching it.
It's also very fun. Like, even if you don't like it, watching watching it and talking about it with your friends and all of these sorts of things is fun, you know?
It is. Yeah.
So, you know, come on. Like, it's
right.
I mean, we all think that the Lord of the Rings cartoons are goofy, but like, if you sat down and watched them with your friends, you would have the biggest, it would be riots. It would be so hilarious, right?
It's true. Yeah.
You'd be all singing, if there's a whip, there's a way, and it would be
right. Yeah, that's true. The experience of it, I do enjoy. I was glad they released 3 episodes all at once, so I could kind of just. It made it a little faster, a little easier, but it's always a fun process, and you know, War of the Rohirrim coming soon too for that process as well. It's going to be a good time, but I mean, Carmine, like I still remember that line from last season. So this season it was heal yourself, and then last season it was I'm good. What Gandalf said.
I don't remember that. I don't remember that at all.
he was yelling at the moth people. I'm good.
I'll take your word for it. I don't fucking remember.
I wish I was kidding. It's stuck in my mind. Yeah.
I was going to say that one of the things that I think is kind of interesting and funny is that before season 1 came out, there was like some preview that showed Celebrimbor in it, and everyone was laughing at the way Celebrimbor looked. And they thought that the show was going to be horrible based on the way he looked. And then for season 2, everyone was laughing at Sauron's elf costume. And and what's funny is that those 2 characters are actually, you know, one of the best parts of the show. Like, actually, you know, that what people think is going to be bad isn't the thing that's bad. Everybody's predictions on things, or before season 1 came out, everyone was making a lot of jokes about Disa,
right. Yep.
And she's one of the best parts of season 1, you know, and
she had like 5-10 minutes of screen time, maybe. Like, she's barely
right. Or Arendir. People were making fun of Arendir. Like, oh, you had to have a black elf. Well, he's actually like one of the best characters in the show. Like,
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's funny because, again, aesthetically, the show does not fail. And I think visually, all that kind of stuff, even where you're like, I'm not sure about that with how it looks, it always actually turns out pretty good. Again, aesthetically. I mean, Sauron was funny because I was so used to seeing him as Halbrand. I was like, this is so weird. How are any of the characters going to fall for this trick? And then it wasn't a trick. He said, no, I've been an emissary of the Valar this whole time. This is my actual form. I was like, okay, that's actually kind of cool. And you know, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention, I did like maybe a third of the Numenor plot. There was definitely some dumb moments. The eagle like coming in when it did to help the person that it did would never happen. But Elendil and he's finally getting moving a little bit. We got to see him as a lord, though. We can't just keep seeing him as this like peasant dude. Oh, they're trying so hard to do Aragorn with him, which makes sense because, you know, Aragorn and Elendil are very much similar characters, and what's
funny
after him
is I talked about the Numenor plot offline with Carmine, and you know, not being super into lore, like I was like, the Numenor plot is just so boring to me, and Carmine told me, he's like, it's there for the super fans, like Numenor has to fall. And so like it's a plot point for the super lore fans, like, and it's funny to hear you, Yoystan, say like that plot line was actually interesting you because you're interested in the lore and you know that like Numenor has to fall and all of that. Well, I'm just like, what the fuck are they doing? They're just twiddling their thumbs. It has nothing to do with anything else.
Well, not only does Numenor have to fall, but Pharazôn needs to come over to Middle-earth and bring, like, the big dogs, the real Numenorian army, like the 7-foot-tall giant soldiers who come over and just destroy Sauron and bring him back as a prisoner. That still needs to go down.
But all of that is true. But if I were to describe the plot of the show to you, which is essentially, Sauron is back and he's trying to forge these rings to take over the elves and the other races. And meanwhile, this other elf has like created a Mordor land and there's a lot of conflict going on and the elves feel like they need to go to war and things like that. And that's essentially and all the characters revolve around those plots.
Yeah.
So what the fuck is Numenor doing? Oh yeah, and there's fucking Numenor. It has nothing to do with the fucking plot. Like,
I think they began to realize something. First off, with this show from the outset, we never have a timeline for anything. It's just so bad. It's so bad. Because honestly, season 1 and 2 could have happened over 8 months. It could be 10 years. I have no idea.
Absolutely. Like how long is Bronwyn and Arondir like rallying troops? How long did it take those forces from Numenor to make it to Mordor?
Yeah, exactly.
Like that could have been years, right?
Theo's aging is probably the only thing one of the only things I have to go off of, and he looks like he's aged like 2 years, maybe. Since
yeah, it's true because it takes so long to film. Yeah,
right. And so I'm like, okay, maybe it's been like 2 years in the story too. But the problem with Numenor is that they are men, and even though they live longer, they introduced Numenor's plot way too early in the show. That should have been a season 2 or 3 thing to where it could actually be interesting for everybody. But now they're like, crap, like we got to do these Rings of Power. We got to do that plot line, but we don't know what to do with Numenor quite yet. There are some easy lore changes you could make to compress the time. And I think they're going to do it. But honestly, if they were going to do it, it should have ended with season 2, right? Sauron getting captured. Oh, but no, he needs to make the One Ring still. He needs to make the One Ring, and then the Numenorians need to come over. And like Carmine says, like these guys they are a bunch of Arnold Schwarzeneggers. Now, I know you can't get a bunch of Arnolds for the whole island, but they are like 7 feet tall. They are taller than Galadriel. They are buff bodybuilders. They live to be like 200-300 years, and they're all super wise and super smart. And so that's what Numenor should be filled with, and that is annoying me because it's meant to be humans in their high days.
So this is it. This is it. Even though Galadriel looks like this tiny little cute girl, she's actually 6'4", and everybody else in the show is just really fucking tall.
That's funny. That's funny.
That perspective, I like it.
Yeah.
I mean, Numenor is one of Tolkien's greatest tragedies that he tries to write because the wisest men like Faramir and Aragorn, like they look back on Numenor and they miss it. They say, like pretty much we should have been better men because they once were. And that was us in our heyday, and we'll never get that glory back. They look back with reverence with Numenor, but as Numenor is presented in the show, I'm like, these guys are a bunch of morons.
they come across as like bureaucratic, like rotten kind of like society that's like past its prime. Like that's how it's kind of coming off.
What it sounds like to me is like they're trying to mirror like the current political climate and how like that's shaping up, like, people
like the fall of Rome or something.
Yeah.
It's like that kind of like idea.
And I wonder if that's where Royan and I said, like Numenor seems to be jumping a lot too. Things were just happening. And there wasn't a lot of like good build up to these things. It's just Elendil's trial and then boom, sea monster and then boom, next thing. There wasn't a lot of in-between scenes at Numenor where we're actually building the lore and building the story up.
To be fair, I don't trust these guys to write in-between scenes, but no, like we should be like it's annoying because season 2 wasted Isildur, and they should be propping him up because that's going to be the final tragedy of the final scene, right? He's supposed to have the One Ring and he doesn't throw it into the fire, and he's supposed to be like somewhat friendly with Elrond, right, for that one scene to play out.
Yeah,
and they haven't even met yet. And we still have to have...
I guess you guys did remind me that I did like that Sauron flashback where you see how just ruthless he is to get to the point where he's found by Galadriel in the water.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That was pretty cool little flashback. I like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's true though. Like, we need to be building these people up, because at the end of the day, when Gil-galad dies, that changes the elven landscape for the rest of the story. Like, that's their last High King. And so now it's the Age of Men is really beginning when Isildur gets the ring. Is like elves are kind of starting to go on their way out. Sauron's defeated, kind of. For some elves, that's more than enough. For some elves, they just want to chill for one more age and then they're out. But now it's kind of the Age of Men. But if we have nothing to compare it to, because we're seeing the fall and we never saw Numenor at its like height. I think that's what they tried to do with season 1, but even then it didn't hit that for me.
You are right. It seems like the Age of Man is falling before the Age of Elves.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So because we never saw them at their height, I don't care as much about their fall. But it should be more interesting than this.
What I'm assuming is going to go down with Isildur for season 3 is that he gets back to Numenor and maybe he has some popularity or some type of thing going on, or maybe he proves very useful, and they probably send him back to Middle-earth with an expeditionary force to take Sauron, and just as Sauron finishes the One Ring, they bring Sauron back, and then that's how Sauron is in a position on Numenor to corrupt everything, and so on and so forth. So I'm assuming that's what they're going to do with Isildur, maybe, because he's going back for season 3, so we'll see what happens with him there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and so one last one with the dwarves. What do you guys think about the dwarves this season?
I forgot them. Oh, wait. His dad goes insane, right?
Yeah.
His dad goes...
It felt like his corruption was so fast, though.
Yeah.
I feel like those rings should take a while for the corruption to take hold.
Right. It should be something where, there's hints of it, and then, his mistrust of the ring and the realization that something's wrong is like slow and over time. Like, it's just so obvious, right?
Yeah, I quite agree, because the dwarves are originally Sauron was like, all right, I'm gonna make 9 Nazgul and I'm gonna make 7 more Nazgul that are like dwarf sized. Like, that's pretty much his goal. He's like, they're meant to do the same thing to all of them, but it only worked on men. It didn't work on dwarves because the dwarves are just more resilient. So we should have seen some failure on Sauron's part with the dwarven rings, where he's like, okay, they're not quite doing what I thought they were going to. But yeah, the greed and the anger, it worked when we got there, but it just happened. Yeah,
it happened too fast. Plus the very end of that plot line, but which, by the way, Durin, the prince, I loved him. I love him throughout. He's great, and. But the way that all ends is like, by the way, real quick, we have 5 minutes left in the episode. Here's the plot for next season involving the dwarves, and you got cousins and uncles who are coming for all these other rings that you have laying around here. All right, good luck. Isn't that basically it?
Yeah, it is. And what's dumb is, like, we know the ring, the dwarven ring, his ring, the ring of Durin, passes on until Thorin's father in the Third Age. Thorin's father eventually loses it at Dol Guldur. And so because they all saw how bad those rings were, it's crazy that anyone would actually put it back on. Like, that's kind of nuts to me, that any dwarf, after seeing their king literally turn and murder some of their own guys and just go absolutely bonkers.
I mean, like, I guess it's in the same sense of, like, when I think about how ridiculous everyone acts around the One Ring, you could argue that they would act just as ridiculous around the other ones. Like, think about in the Jackson movies, like, everyone's temptation around the rings, and you're like, what are you fucking thinking? You literally just saw somebody go crazy. Like, what are you doing? Like,
it's true, but at least they realize, don't put on the One Ring. Like, we got to destroy this thing. No matter what you do, try not to put it on. And then it's like, oh crap, he put it on. But with this one, it's like, why would anyone allow Durin near that? I'm kind of surprised Disa didn't just kick it when it was down there, just kick it into the Balrog so that Durin never has the chance, why would anyone follow a king who puts the ring on? And maybe we see he never puts it on. But he carries it, I guess. It's just, why would they willingly follow him, right? The Nazgul, they were cast out of their societies, I must imagine. They were cast out of their societies when they became Nazgul. I don't think they retained their leadership of like the Easterlings and the Numenorians and stuff. So I don't know why they wouldn't cast out the dwarves for... Dude, you just put on this ring and murdered 10 of us and just... You unleashed a Balrog. Like, we're not going to trust your son to do the same thing.
I was going to ask you, Carmine, if you knew that Durin the third, he's the father from Westworld. Did you know that?
I did not, but now that I remember the father. You mean Abernathy?
Yeah, the one that's stuck in the loop where he keeps getting reincarnated and
not Abernathy, the other guy, Delos.
Yeah, Delos. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's Papa Delos.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, he's good at that.
He's Papa Delos. Also, the Dark Wizard is Mance Rayder.
Of course, yeah, I knew that. Yeah, Mance Rayder.
Well, I mean, he's got that huge beard, so like you don't think about it.
Yeah, no, and Elrond is young Ned Stark. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But overall, and I think we all agree here now, that Lord of the Rings of Power Season 2, just slightly, like barely better than Season 1, but that's not saying much. And, again, to echo what what someone else said about House of the Dragon Season 2, if there was one show this year that could have been an email, it was this one. It was Season 2, Rings of Power.